There comes a point when you realize the game hasn't changed. You have. The legs don't recover the same. The mistakes cost a little more. But to compete, it's still there. The love of the game of hockey is still there. You just have to adjust. This is Shift Change, staying in the game at 50 plus. Every player has a hometown. Mine is Buffalo in Western New York. It's where I first fell in love with the game of hockey, where I spent countless hours in cold arenas, and where so many lifelong friendships were made. Today, I'm going home. Hey everybody, welcome back to Shift Change. I'm Rich Ineson. Thanks for coming along. This isn't an interview episode. It's a chance for me to take you on a personal tour of the places that shaped my life in hockey. Along the way, we'll visit some iconic rinks, talk to Sabres and Bills history, and eat some classic Western New York food, and share a few stories that I've never told. So why the trip back to Buffalo? Well, Lynn and I had to go back for a family birthday party, and we got in kind of late on our first night and landed around 9 o'clock in Buffalo. So it was dark when we got there, and we haven't been there, and it's been probably about a year. And driving from the airport in Buffalo to the town of East Aurora where we were staying, it was dark, and we couldn't find landmarks to really show us where we were. We had to use maps to get to East Aurora because things have changed so much. And at night, we couldn't tell where we were. So it was kind of interesting. But we stayed out in East Aurora, and if you've never been to East Aurora, New York, it's very like Norman Rockwell. The whole town has that postcard, small town Americana look. And, a fun thing about East Aurora is it was actually the setting for the Buffalo Bills Christmas Hallmark setting. Buffalo Bills Hallmark Christmas special that was filmed there last year. But a neat little town. It's not far out of Orchard Park, New York, where the Bills Stadium is, but a nice little walking town where you can get up in the morning. We took a walk over to the Elm Street Bakery. It's within walking distance. That also was used in the filming of the Hallmark Buffalo Bills Christmas story as well. But with East Aurora, it has that very small town Buffalo charm. It's not that far out of Buffalo, like 35 minutes or so. And it's just an amazing little town if you've never been there. And one of the cool things about the town of East Aurora is it actually has the original rink from the first Winter Classic that was played between the Buffalo Sabres and the Pittsburgh Penguins out at what now is the Highmark Stadium, which is actually gone now and only half a stadium right now. But that's the original rink. They have it outdoors there, which is still pretty cool. They put a roof over it. And I did play there quite a few times over the years. Some buddies and I would always rent the rink out on Thanksgiving and have a Thanksgiving skate, and our kids would come out. It would be kind of cool. But yeah, it's the original rink. They use the same graphics on the boards. The ice has the original Winter Classic logo. And that Winter Classic is one that Sidney Crosby scored on Ryan Miller in a shootout to beat them in the snow falling classic game that it was. And in my opinion, there hasn't been a Winter Classic that's even compared to that one. So I'm hoping that with the new stadium, maybe they bring the Winter Classic back to Buffalo, which would be pretty cool, I think. But driving, we had to go visit Lynn's mom. So we went over to Alden, New York, and we had to go by our old house, which seemed kind of weird for us. But, it's pretty cool to see all the old hangouts that we saw. But one of the first things we did when we got in the next day is we went over to the Bills Stadium, and the new Highmark is up and the old Highmark is halfway down, and it is a giant hole in the ground with only the stands on one side. So we had to laugh because it looked like the pit. And if you're fans of the Parks and Recreation, you're well aware of the pit. But looking at the old stadium, it brought back a lot of memories for me. I know when I was a kid, football wasn't the main thing for me, but I love the Bills as all people in Buffalo do. I was a huge Joe Ferguson fan, loved the original number 12 for the Buffalo Bills. But one of the memories I had was I didn't go to a lot of games, but my dad took me to a game that was back in September of 79, September 2nd, and the Bills and the Dolphins were playing. It's what was called then Rich Stadium. And late in the game, Buffalo had a kicker named Tom Dempsey, and Tom only had a half a foot. He was born without toes on that foot, and he became a field goal kicker in the NFL. But at the end of the game, it was It was 9-7, and the Bills had a 34-yard field goal attempt to win it. And what's interesting about this field goal attempt and this win is the Bills had gone 19 straight games without beating the Miami Dolphins. And I remember the crowd was crazy. I remember it was cold and rainy and kind of crappy weather, but Dempsey missed the kick. He pushed it wide. And if you're a Buffalo fan, we don't like to hear anything wide, especially when it comes down to Super Bowls, with the wide right being a saying that will go down in Bills history. But the miss extended that streak to 19 games, but eventually it reached 20, covering the entire 1970s. The Bills could not beat the Dolphins. But the next year they finally did it, almost a year to the date. The Bills finally broke through and beat the Dolphins 17-7, and the Bills fans stormed the field that year and tore down the field goal post. And I believe it was one of the first times that they tore the field goal post down. I know they did it years ago as well. But so that was kind of a cool memory I had when I was coaching the Cleve Hill JFK high school hockey team. We actually took on a concession stand for a fundraiser. So Lynn and I worked quite a bit at a concession stand for one season, and that had a ton of memories just in itself. Being in that stadium when it was single-digit temperatures or the heavy snows were coming down and the hallways of the stadium were not heated. So even the concession stands were cold. Beer would freeze, the taps would freeze up. So it was an interesting situation working them. Since then, I've never been a big fan of roller hot dogs because that's all we sold was roller hot dogs and beer. But another really cool memory. I know one night we had to stay after and clean up after the game, and we came out to a snowstorm and had to find our car and unbury it and try to drive home. But the game started with no snow, like in typical Bills fashion. No snow to start the game, but a blizzard comes in and buried the stadium. But we looked directly across the road, and they have built the brand new Highmark Stadium, and it's pretty impressive. I gotta say, it's pretty neat. You know, a little disappointed they didn't build a dome, but I think they've built in a lot of the things that will help them as far as wind, and the grass is heated. So as the snow falls, the grass will melt. A lot of the fans are covered, so they won't see any snow landing on them as well. But pretty cool, amazing looking stadium. They had just put in the giant silver buffaloes out in the entrance to the stadium, so we were able to get some pictures with that. So that was pretty cool as well. But it's interesting how the stadium's evolution mirrors the city's own changes. You know, the city of Buffalo has kind of grown up in a lot of newer and modern things. And that stadium, I believe, might have been one of the oldest ones next to the Kansas City Chiefs Stadium. But now we have one of the newer stadiums. And, you know, I don't know if I'll get back to actually see a game in it, but I'm pretty excited to see it open the second game of the season coming up. So, but pretty amazing situation out there in Orchard Park. But yeah, we moved on to the next day. We decided to take a ride down to the KeyBank Center and visit there. We went into the Sabre store, bought a bunch of merch, and kind of walked around outside in the Alumni Plaza. They have a statue of the French Connection out there. And if you're not familiar with the French Connection, it was Gilbert Perrault, René Robert, and Rick Martin. Perrault is the only living man left in that line. And I know he still does a lot of alumni stuff with the Sabres. But Rick Martin was my favorite player. And growing up, my dad, I thought, always looked like Rick Martin. He had the long hair with the big, thick mustache. So I always liked Rick Martin for that because he looked like my dad, but definitely one of the better players on the team at the time. So, but it was interesting because right across the road, in similar fashion to the Bills, is the old footprint of the Memorial Auditorium, or what we called the Aud in Buffalo. And it's gone. They tore it down, but they left this gigantic pit. And again, yes, it's a pit. It looks like the pit from Parks and Recreation. So Buffalo has two pits, but they were working on doing something in the pit. They're cleaning it up, or they've got all kinds of new construction down there around the Harbor Center, in the Sabres practice rinks and that kind of thing. But it brought back a lot of memories. We walked around it, and I was telling my wife, we were actually standing in the same exact spot where, you know, I would stand outside after going to a game. We'd run outside and run to the back of the arena where the buses would park, and the players would come out of the old Aud in the back. So we stood in the back and I showed Lynn kind of where we would hang out and just wait. And I also remember my dad had season tickets one year at the Old Aud, and I believe he sat in the Reds. And if you're not familiar with the old auditorium, the Golds were the lower level, and then there was the Reds, and then the Blues, and then the upper level were the Oranges. And I remember one year my dad took me to see Kiss. And we sat up in the Oranges, and those old arenas back then, the seats, you sat and the person sat below you. They were so steep, but when you were up that high, you could literally see over the edge, and you would look right down almost onto the rink. It was crazy how high and steep those orange seats were. But one of the things I remember pretty vividly about that old auditorium is back in the day, you could smoke in the arena. They didn't allow you to smoke in the seats, but you could go smoke in the hallways. But all that did was put a layer of smoke over the top of the rink when the players were playing, and you could smell the smoke. And they had in the rafters a lot of these big cone sound diffusers up there that were yellow, I think, from all the smoke that would accumulate in them. But that smell of walking in the hallways, and it almost smelled like when you got there, they just kind of swept the hallways up. It smelled dusty and smoky, but people would stand in the hallways and smoke cigarettes, throughout the game. They'd run out. And back then it was funny too, because you would always hear a PA announcement come over the speakers, because we didn't have phones and we didn't have pagers, and they'd always call a doctor over the arena speaker system to call his office. So it was kind of neat to see, when you look back at what technology we had back then compared to now. Everybody's connected to everything all the time. But back then, if a doctor had to deliver a baby and he was at the hockey game, he had to call his office from there. So it was interesting to see that back then. So, but, some of the big memories I remember about that, arena is, I went to go see Gretzky score his 77th goal, and that was pretty awesome. To see it live and see it happen was something that, another thing I'll remember my whole life. But, look at the KeyBank Center now. It is one of the oldest rinks in the league now, but it's still way better than the old Aud was. But the difference is the energy was different, I felt like, in the old Aud versus the new Aud. And it was smaller as well, but the seats were closed in tighter on the arena. So it felt like the fans were right on top of you. So it always had a different energy feel. But, now that the Sabres are back in the playoffs, the energy appears to be back in that arena, and it can be pretty loud as well. So that was pretty cool back then too, to hear the crowd in Buffalo. But another day we took a drive, and I wanted to go see the different hockey rinks that I'd played at over the years, or either played at or coached in. And one of the things that I wanted to do was just kind of go in and look around at the rinks and try to just dig up some old memories of, good and bad over the years. So, one of the rinks we went over to Cheektowaga Recreation Center, and my dad coached there for years, and I played for my dad pretty much my whole life. But, going into Cheektowaga and seeing all the old jerseys retired up there, and some of the players that had passed away while we were younger, their jerseys were up on the wall, but nothing had really changed in that rink. And the Cheektowaga Recreation Center was probably, for most of the time that I played hockey, the best rink in all of Western New York. It was not really cold. It had an amazing lobby. But, since then, they've got the Harbor Center downtown that is owned by the Sabres, and they have the Pepsi Center out in Amherst, New York, which is a 4 or 5 pad rink, which is pretty cool too. But back in the day, Cheektowaga was by far the best place to play hockey back in the day. So, but I remember a lot of really cool things there. I remember as a kid being kicked out of a game when I was maybe 10 or 11 or 12. I can't remember, but I remember I swung a stick two-handed and hit somebody across the back. And, the referee threw me out, and my dad grabbed me and threw me off the bench. And I remember having to walk to the locker room by myself, and the door was locked, and I kicked at it, and I thought, looking back now, what the heck was I doing? But, the temper kicked in, and, it's just one of the dumber things I've done as a hockey player. But I remember coaching there. I was coaching my kids, and we were coaching in the last few games of the season, and we needed a win to qualify for the playoffs. And it was a night that my sister had just passed away, and we were down, or we were tied in the last few seconds of the game. And I remember my son Zach scored a big goal to beat Tonawanda and put us in the playoffs. So that was a pretty cool thing too. So, but one of the things we also wanted to do was get over to Holiday Twin Rinks. And Holiday Twin Rinks is probably one of the oldest rinks in Western New York, but probably still one of the busiest rinks in Western New York. And it's run by the Grundich family, and they've been around as long as I can remember. I know the Sabres used to practice out of this rink. They also practice out of Leisure Rinks and also out of Saberland out in Wheatfield, New York. But one of the things I remember most about Holiday Twin Rinks is it's one of the first places my dad put me on skates. And I remember my dad worked for a plastics company, and he made a shield and attached it to my helmet. So now we're talking probably early 70s where nobody was wearing a shield. I think maybe the European players were, maybe Boreas Salming was wearing a shield and was my dad's favorite player. So my dad puts me in hockey, and he puts a shield on my helmet and puts me out on the ice. And I remember the coach coming up to my dad saying, "Hey, you got to have a mask. You can't wear a shield." And they wouldn't let me skate till my dad went and got a shield or a full mask put on my helmet. So it was just interesting that my dad was willing to put me out there without a mask on. And I know he grew up playing without a mask, but it's just seems weird to see a kid out there without a face mask on. So, but and then I also played a lot of men's hockey there as well. I played in a junior AAA hockey program that was played every summer, and it was a lot of the local players that either played pro or college or somewhere at an upper level. And it was an interesting league. There was a lot of NHL guys that either stayed in Buffalo or are from Buffalo would come back and play. Alex Mogilny played on a team I played on, and I think maybe Randy Burge might have played on it once or twice before I got there. So, but I remember there was a guy named Dirty Al, and his name was Al Hurt. And Al is a phenomenal hockey player and an amazing guy. And he's still in Buffalo. And I was playing with Al on Saturday nights at Depew Rink, but he had this nickname, Dirty Al. And I remember we played against them, and I was deathly afraid of Dirty Al because, I heard so many things about this guy. And then I got to know him later in life, and he's actually the really nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. I got to know his son, Jason, and through our kids playing hockey, and then Jason playing with us on a Saturday night as well. But yeah, so playing in those junior leagues was pretty cool. And I got to play with a lot of NHL guys that I never would have played with if it wasn't for that league. So that was pretty cool as well. So, but then we took a ride over to Depew Rink, and Depew Rink is a little town rink in Depew, New York. It's considered an indoor rink, but it's got an open end on one side. And Depew Rink was by far the coldest rink in Western New York. If it was, 10 degrees outside, it was probably colder than that inside. But probably the best ice, and probably still has the best ice in Western New York. I went to play there, I think, as a Bantam or possibly a midget. My dad took our whole team from Cheektowaga, and we went over to play in Depew for a team called the Depew Rovers, and met a lot of good friends over in that area as well, and even played men's hockey with those guys later on in life. But I played most of my Saturday night hockey at Depew, and we played with some great people there. I mean, a guy that ran it named Don Kwok was just a great guy. And I think just 10 years ago, he was in his 70s. I think Don's probably in his early 80s now. But Don was the off-ice official that controlled the goal light behind the net at the Odd and at the KeyBank Center. And then eventually he got pushed up to the press box along the goal line, and he would work the goal line from up there because I think the NHL teams wanted those spots behind the net for seats instead of goal judges. So that the goal judge went away, and I think Don's job eventually kind of went away as well. But playing hockey in Buffalo and seeing all these rinks and thinking about all the people and that I played with in all these rinks was just an amazing experience growing up. I had one memory at Holiday Twin Rinks. I remember my dad was playing in a men's league and they were short guys. And my dad brought me out at 14 to play in this men's league. And it's an over 18 league. And I think I might have had a couple of goals, maybe 2 or 3, possibly. I think it was 3. But in typical fashion, I have a big mouth, and I think I was talking a lot of crap to their defensemen as my dad was setting me up for goals. And I remember these guys just being massive men, bearded, mustached men that, we're talking late 80s here, or I'm sorry, late 70s, maybe early 80s. And we won the game, and in the handshake afterwards, one of the big bearded guys that I had been running my mouth at grabbed my hand, pulled me in, and just started to pummel me. And I remember going down to the ice and him just wailing on me, and a pile ensued on top of me. And I can remember my face mask being contorted on the bottom of this pile. And I squirted my way out, and the refs broke it up. And I thought to myself, where the hell is my father in all this? Why didn't my father come help me? And I look over and I see my dad just leaning up against the boards watching it with another player. And I remember asking him after, like, why weren't you helping me? I needed you down there. And he said he wanted nothing to do with it. He figured I'd be fine. But that was the last time that I played, because the team complained to the league that I was under 18 and not old enough to play in the league. So that was the last time I played with my dad. And probably the only time I played with my dad in a league game. So it was kind of fun, and it's a really cool memory. So, but just being around all these people that I've played with, people I've come in contact with over the years through coaching in hockey, these are the people who shaped me and helped me become who I am. So, it was just a great walk down memory lane. The other thing is, about Buffalo, if you don't know a lot about Buffalo, the food is absolutely incredible. And, when we go back, one of the things we really try to do is hit Picasso's Pizza. And, everybody in Buffalo's got an opinion on what's the best pizza. And there's so many good pizzerias in Buffalo. They're all good, but we love Picasso's. And then there's the chicken wing debate. We like our Picasso wings, but there's the old, who the originals are. And again, in Buffalo, everybody makes a good wing, whether it's Duff's or Anchor Bar, who is the original. If you've flown into the Buffalo airport, Anchor Bar actually is in the airport. But so it's a preference, and everybody makes a good wing in Buffalo. I guess it doesn't really matter where you go. Everybody's done such a good job perfecting it over the years. So, so food is a big thing, whether you're going for beef on weck in Buffalo, which I'm not a big fan of. I don't like a roll that has salt and seeds on it. It's just not something I like. But so Picasso's was amazing. We did go to a nice restaurant in East Aurora called Rinks on Main, which was an amazing place, great steakhouse, and it's over 100 years old, the building, so that was kind of cool too. But I wish I could have saw more people while we were there, but we were in for just a quick jump, and I got to catch up with a friend of mine, Jeff Wengler, that I haven't seen in probably a year, but him and I worked together for years. But so just a great trip all in all. The other thing is just Buffalo's growing up. There's so much new development. We drove out all around Buffalo in the Cheektowaga area, and there's so many new things going up and so much development. But we also saw a lot of places that are closed down too. So, when I go by my old neighborhood and what they call Sloan, New York, which is pretty much just a little section of Cheektowaga, New York. Nothing's changed there. I think it's the same it's been since the 1950s. It's one of those things like, you can always go home, So, but the question people always ask me is, would you move back to Buffalo? And, I don't think I'd go back. We built such a life out in the West here in Arizona, and we like not shoveling snow anymore. And we left because I think one of the last snowstorms we were involved in, we got like 8 feet of snow in 3 days, and it was a snow band that hit Alden, New York. And, we shoveled for 3 days. The power was out, and we just said, we can't do it anymore. You just get to a point where you can't do it anymore. But we're also at a point in Arizona where we're kind of tired of the heat now as well, too. So, but Would I move back? No. I'm happy where we are. I love to say I'm from Buffalo. I'm proud to say I'm from Buffalo. We're proud Bills and Sabre fans. And, Buffalo's what shaped me into who I am today. But yeah, so I don't know if you ever get a chance to go back to Buffalo, it's a great experience. There is a lot to do. If you've never done it, you've got Niagara Falls there. There's a lot of really cool things for people to see. But that's about all I got today for you guys. Just wanted to touch base. Got some interviews coming up here in the next couple of weeks, and we're going to try and get some really cool guests on. So if you could just give us a like, subscribe, download our episodes, check us out on YouTube and LinkedIn. I appreciate you. Have a great day. We'll talk soon.